Well, good afternoon, everyone. On this webinar today, you're hearing my voice, which is, let me get to the next slide here. Derek Thyssen. I'm a loss control consultant with Argent, and today we're going to be talking about ladder safety and some of the different areas that we should be looking at within our organization that we use ladders, and some of the different safe practices that we need to anticipate before we start using the ladders. And so with that said, well, let's cover the objectives that we plan to cover today in the webinar. The first one that I want to touch on is understanding the true cost associated with any fall injuries related to your organization operations. And when I talk about cost, we're not just focusing on the workers' compensation costs. We will touch on that, obviously, but there's also costs associated with OSHA citations and potential violations from a compliance standpoint, and then also the indirect costs, which are oftentimes harder to place an actual price tag on, but do have a significant financial price to pay on the organization side. So we'll go through some of the numbers there. Then we'll touch on some of the unsafe work practices that you may see within your organization, whether it be in a construction site or maybe in a manufacturing facility or just simply in a shop. I want to make sure that everybody leaves today with an idea on what an unsafe work practice is when it's related to ladder use. And we'll talk about the corrective actions you can take to make sure that those unsafe practices don't result in an employee injury. Then, lastly, we want to make sure that we can we provide you with the tools to assess your own organization's ladder safety program and really take a close look into the type of training that you're performing with your employees, what the inspection process looks like for your ladders, and then making sure that we take an inventory of our ladders to determine, do we have the right type of ladders and the right number of ladders to allow our employees to do this job as safely as possible. If at any time you do have any questions, I believe you can type those into the chat box, and we can certainly provide an answer to those as well. So let's move forward with the cost impact on your organization, and specifically looking at ladder-related injuries. Each year within the United States, we have about 500,000 people that are treated for serious injuries from falls off ladders, and about 300 people each year that die. The estimated cost of these can be anywhere from $24 billion, and what that comes from is lost work, medical costs, legal liability, and pain and suffering expenses. When looking at those first two bullet points, now we're just primarily looking at the entire nation and not just the work force that we have in the United States, but that third bullet point does touch on it from a study back in 2011 where they looked at the different types of demographics associated with individuals that have fallen, and noticed that there was a trend between those folks typically being male, Hispanic, older, self-employed, work in small establishments, and obviously in construction, maintenance, and repair fields. So again, when looking in our organization, we need to take a close look at these folks that we have working in these different areas, and again, taking a look at the ladders that they're using and how they're using them. When looking specifically at Argent data, about a year ago, we threw together numbers on the different causations that we see from injuries that occur to our insureds. And the data that we are looking at here today is based on July 7th of 2015 to July 7th of 2018. And when looking specifically at the causation of injury being a fall or a slip from a ladder or a scaffold, we're seeing a trend here. And the first one that we notice is it has the highest average indemnity claim or lost time claim cost of $58,982. And so a lost time claim, and we don't need to go into detail on this, but those lost time or indemnity claims go into your future experience modification rating at 100% impact, whereas a medical only claim is given a 70% reduction on how that impacts your future EMODs. So you can see these claims averaging at $58,000 is going to have a significant cost impact on future premiums down the road. Not only that, just the overall average claim cost is $21,000, and with falls and slips from ladders and scaffolds, the highest percentage of claims to be indemnity, meaning there's a 33% chance that if you do have an injury from this, it could be a lost time or an indemnity claim. So again, these injuries typically are very severe. They typically require surgery, recovery, physical therapy, and possibly lost time, and one that should be a focus on within your organization. Another interesting loss control resource that we started about 2 years ago now are what's called the large loss lesson learned, which I realize is a mouthful, so we refer to them as L4s. And what they are essentially is a summary or a description of an incident that actually occurred to one of Argent's insureds. This one is back in August 21st of 2018. Where a roofing repair crew had 2 employees that needed to patch up a leak that was detected. And of course, it was raining at the time that they needed to use this ladder to go up onto the roof and detect the leak. I don't need to read through the entire paragraph. You can certainly do that as you're looking at the slide, but the short of the long is essentially the employee did slip and fall 24 feet down to the ground below and resulted in an injury that required some surgery to fix a foot fracture. If you look at that slide, you can also see the initial estimated loss, which was $82,000, and the experience modification impact of 0.12 points that would be added to that mod or to that employer's mod, just based solely on this injury. And so this is something that we see not only in the roofing industry, but like I mentioned before, manufacturing as well, is when we have somebody that falls from a roof, there's a good chance it's going to be a very severe injury, and the cost impact equates to a higher experience modification rating. For accessing these L4 documents, you can always visit Insured Access at www.wbconnect.com, and under Loss Control Materials, you'll notice a tab for L4, or Large Loss Lesson Learned. And in there, you'll not only find injuries from falls off ladders, but a variety of other significant or serious injuries that an Argent insured has experienced, and not only the description of incident that will be provided, but also preventative measures that you can take to prevent that from occurring within your organization. So I would encourage everyone to take some time and look at those L4s. So we talked a little bit about the cost impact on the insurance side, but of course, as we all know, regulatory compliance agencies also can have a significant financial burden on us if we violate the different safety standards that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has put in place. In looking at the data as far as most frequently violated or cited violations, the slide is based off of 2018 information. And you can see that back in 2018, it was the 6th most frequently cited standard by OSHA. I actually, prior to coming into this webinar today, looked, and the 2019 numbers are out, and surprise, surprise, ladder safety violations are number 6th again as far as most frequently cited standards. So this likely isn't going anywhere. OSHA is going to have a very close eye on ladders and again, proper and safe use. And when looking at that, the types of violations that OSHA was seeing was not extending far enough past that upper landing surface. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, how far or how long that ladder needs to be extended to in order to safely step onto an upper landing surface. Not being used for its designed purpose. So deviating from what the manufacturer originally designed that ladder to be used for and how to be used safely. Standing on the top or top step, using damaged ladders, and the 4-to-1 ratio, which again, we don't need to get into right now, but we will certainly cover in a few slides here. Just know that these are fairly easy for the OSHA folks to identify. It may not even require them to climb up onto a roof or even access a building. If they simply drive by a construction site, I think most of they can pretty much verify that somebody is not in compliance or an employer is not in compliance with these requirements. So when looking at the different hazards within our organization, we always like to use the hierarchy of controls. And when speaking of hierarchy of controls and how it relates to ladder safety, the first step that we always take is to look if we can substitute or eliminate that actual ladder use. And here are just a few pictures with links to go along with them on ways that we can actually eliminate somebody from actually having to step or use a ladder. Instead, they're in the bottom left-hand picture, you can see changing out light bulbs while standing at ground level because they're using an extension pole. Or on the picture to the right, cleaning out the gutters and avoid using the ladder by using an extension for the leaf blower. So these are all ways that we're actually eliminating that hazard. Another one that I do not have listed would be looking at transferring the risk onto a professional contractor that does that type of work. If your organization typically doesn't use ladders in your daily operations, but you need to change out a light bulb or perform some roof maintenance, it might be best to look at a professional contractor that could help you with that instead of putting your own employees who may not be familiar with safe ladder practices to get that job done. Then going further down the list of hierarchy of controls as it relates to ladder safety, use of passive fall protection. What we're talking about here would, instead of using a ladder to perform a task at an elevation, why not use a scissor lift or a mobile elevated work platform, an aerial boom type of lift as well. Mobile scaffold, or Baker scaffold as it is often referred to, would be a safer option, especially if it's equipped with guard railings at 42 inches for the top rail, plus or minus 3 inches, and mid rail at half the distance from the top rail to the platform of that scaffold. That would be a form or a barrier that would actually prevent your folks from falling, unlike a ladder that is not equipped with guard railings. If we can't go that route, then we can do what this contractor is doing in the picture to the right in the corner, which is using fall arrest equipment. Now, if you look closely at this picture, there's an employee working from a step ladder, and to that employee's right is a floor opening. And while there are guard railings in place and look to be somewhat compliant with the height requirements of those guard railing requirements, he obviously is not on floor level, and the guard railings would not prevent him from falling down this floor hole. So in this case, what this employee chose to do was utilize a personal fall arrest system with the overhead exposed joist. You can see there's an anchorage point connected to a self-retracting lifeline and then connected to the employee's body harness. In the event that he does fall, and in the event he falls to his right, that employee would be protected with the use of that fall arrest equipment. If all else fails, then we can always go towards the administrative control routes, and that would be looking at ensuring our ladder inspection process is in place, making sure that all of our employees are properly trained on the safe use of ladders, and even consider, which some contractors are doing these days, similar to a hot work permit program, is utilizing a ladder permit program while looking at the type of tasks that need to be performed at elevation and making sure that they have the light ladder for the job and that it has been inspected and used properly. So one of the first things that we need to consider when we're talking ladder safety is, are we choosing the right ladder for the job we're performing? And like I talked about before with the OSHA violations, one of the most frequently cited requirements that they have is employees using ladders on the top or top step of a step ladder. And so in this case, and you can see from the diagram, we want to look and make sure that the ladders that are being used, or the ladders that are going out to jobs or being used in our facilities, are they tall enough to perform the task that needs to be done? And generally speaking, we want to look at the height of that ladder and the height of the task being performed and make sure it's within that 4-foot range, because that is typically the maximum reach that you have. Is 4 feet higher than the ladder to make sure that you're not standing on the top or top step. So that's something that we need to take into consideration. Is also, do we have any electrical conductors that are in the area? If so, then we definitely want to go the fiberglass route, being that it's an insulated type of ladder opposed to aluminum, which is a conductor and could complete that circuit if it were to come into contact with those electrical conductors. The picture to the right illustrates a scenario where that could likely happen. One of the other things that we also need to consider is, what type of weight are we placing on that ladder? And the way to figure out if our ladder is sufficient or capable of supporting the weight that we're placing on that ladder is to look at the duty rating that we have. and it should be listed on the labels that are attached typically to the side rails of the ladder, and it's going to tell you what rating or what type of ladder. Is it a heavy duty type 1 or is it a light duty type 3? Obviously the type 1 would be a better option, but the other thing that we do need to consider is not only the employee's weight that's being placed on that ladder, but what type of tools are they working with? What type of materials will they be handling? And in even some cases, what type of clothes or personal protective equipment are they going to be wearing? All of that weight needs to be taken into consideration when choosing which ladder to use, to make sure that, again, that it does not fail. And one of the things that can maybe help your organization think about these things ahead of time is by implementing a pre-job planning process. And the one that I've attached here, and again, this can be found on Insured Access at wbconnect.com, is one that I just threw together to complete to kind of show you the things we should be looking at. So you can see there's a red X that is checking, and let's see if I can, checking falls. And then below it, it talks about the specific job tasks that we're going to be performing today, which in this example is install hanging pipe on a 3rd floor. To do that, there's going to be a fall exposure from a hazard standpoint from that actual step ladder. And in order to prevent an injury from occurring, we want to make sure the employees are aware that they have the tall enough ladder, and in this case would be an 8-foot tall ladder, and that they use 3 points of contact while using the ladder to hang their pipe. So if your organization isn't currently using a pre-job planning or daily task type of planning form or process, this might be a good time to do so in order to prevent a ladder fall injury. So we talked about choosing the right type of ladder for the jobs we're performing. Now we need to make sure that we're not using ladders that could be damaged or missing parts. And obviously, if we do move forward with using one that is damaged, it could result in serious injury. So when looking at the OSHA requirements, they do talk about a competent person must inspect ladders. And if you're familiar with that term competent person, you might have seen it in different requirements from scaffoldings to excavations. It's also used in the ladder requirements as well. And simply put, that competent person needs to have 2 capabilities. One is they need to have knowledge in ladder safety and how to identify damaged or missing parts from a ladder. And then they also need to have the authority to take that ladder out of service. And so whomever you deem within your organization that competent to do those 2 things, to have the knowledge and authority to maybe remove a ladder out of service, should be doing this on a regular basis. That ladder on the bottom is obviously defective, and if you can't see, I know it's a little bit difficult, but the side rail, I guess it would be on the top side rail side, is cracked and damaged and obviously missing a portion of it. In event that you find a ladder within your operations that looks like this, we'd at minimum want to make sure that it's tagged out of service with something tagged to the effect of do not use, or better yet, get rid of it. Throw it in the dumpster, get it off your property. It doesn't pay to hang on to ladders like this because it could result in serious injury where it could cost even more to the organization over time. Other things to look at when you're doing your inspections of the ladders are looking for those damaged or loose parts. So the feet, right? The base of support is what's holding that ladder in place. If those feet are damaged anyway, if bolts are loose and nuts are missing, there's a potential for that foot to become dislodged or the movement to throw the worker off balance. So that would be a good starting point when doing your ladder inspections, to make sure those feet are in good condition. Also for step ladders, making sure our spreader bars are in place as well. Rung stops, that they aren't missing or they're not engaging properly for our extension or non-self-supporting ladders. Are the side rails cut, cracked? Looking for any splintering, twisting, any type of holes that might have been drilled them, or welding slag. All of those things can again deteriorate the structural integrity of those side rails, and again might be a situation where we'd want to get rid of it. Are the labels legible? Can we determine what duty rating that ladder has? Can we read it? Oftentimes, if ladders are kept outside, those labels tend to fade and then we can't read what's on them, so we need to replace them. Is the surface of the ladder in stable level? We'll talk about that a little bit more in case, obviously it's not a perfect world, and oftentimes we do need to set up ladders on a graded or a sloped surface. And so there are options to help to maintain the level of that ladder in those situations. Is there any potential for ladder to be struck by other workers or equipment? So making sure that we're not setting up this ladder in adjacent to an overhead door to a shop or into an entrance to an office. We need to keep the ladders away from those areas so someone or something doesn't bump into them, especially while it's workers on the ladder. And lastly, one thing that just from a personal standpoint, I'd like you all to look at is making sure that our rope and pulleys are working for our extension ladders. And this, again, segues into one of those L4s that we looked at before. In a situation for this injury, which occurred July 26th of 2018, we had a ladder, an extension ladder that was set at 40 foot high, or is 40 foot, I'm sorry, when it's extension ladder, but it was set up in a way that it was nearly fully extended, and the rope and pulley was missing from this particular ladder. And in order to lower the fly section, which is the top portion of the extension ladder, an employee climbed up and then began to try to push the fly section upwards and lower it to the ground. At this point, the fly section actually came dislodged because the rung stop wasn't fully engaged, and as the fly section came down, in order to avoid that from knocking the employee off the ladder and falling probably about 16 feet, the employee caught it with their arm, and it resulted into a serious shoulder injury, which required torn rotator cuff surgery. So this is an injury that, again, looking at your extension ladders, if we have those ropes and pulleys and they're being used and maintained properly, this is a scenario that your organization can avoid. So when looking at the OSHA requirements for when we do need to have a stairway or ladder or ramp, it's not too high of an elevation. They say at any break-in elevation of 19 inches or more, we need to have one of those in place. And typically at a smaller elevation like that of 19 inches, we're not going to find a ladder. But I have been on many roofs over the years where there's different elevations that might be 4 feet higher than the roof that's being worked on, and there's no ladder in place. There might be a makeshift stairway created by empty pallets. I've seen all sorts of creative ways to address those situations. But long story short, we do need to have a stairway or ladder with those breaks in elevation 19 inches or greater. And a bucket or a 5-gallon pail is not that type of solution. In fact, anytime we're performing any job, we want to make sure that we have the right equipment for the job. In this case, an employee needs to work in an elevation, so they decided, hey, the closest thing next to me is a pail. Why don't I use that as a ladder? It's not the safest option, obviously. There's a potential for that pail to tip over. It doesn't give them enough surface area for his feet to be completely covered. And so a ladder or a lift or scaffold would obviously be a safer option when looking at this type of task. Now, as I mentioned before, the ladder labels that we have will state that you cannot, especially for step ladders, will state that you cannot step on the top or top step of that step ladder. This is also an OSHA requirement, and I've included the regulation number there to help for your reference of that. But obviously in all these pictures that you see down at the bottom, they're all violations of this requirement, which again can be found in the OSHA standard, but also on the ladder labels as well. Here was an interesting picture. I believe one of my colleagues had taken at one of his customers' places of business. There's basically a barrier type of plate that would go over that top step of the step ladder, and it has actual warning labels on it saying danger, do not step here, and where's the bottom step. This is a physical barrier that if we're continuing to have issues with employees improperly using our ladders and stepping on the top step, this may be an option to help prevent that type of unsafe behavior. So in this picture, you can see we have two employees working up in the ceiling of a construction project. Looks like they may be working with some duct work, and both of them have both their feet on the steps. The other thing that I noticed that I like to see is making sure that we have a belt buckle between the side rails. It's very easy for us to forget that we need to reposition the ladder as we move down, as we're installing ductwork or pipe or anything overhead, and forget to reposition our ladder. So if we find ourselves or our employees reaching outwards and the belt buckle starts to go past the side rails, it's a good time to get down from the ladder, reposition it, and again, maintain that center of gravity. We also want to make sure that we're using the right sized ladder for this job, and you can see again, nobody's stepping on the top or top step of the step ladder. This is obviously the bad. This is what we don't want to see when we go out to our job sites and into our shops, is seeing employees use a step ladder improperly. On the picture to the left, you can see the employee straddling it with their foot on one of the cross braces on the back side of the ladder. Those are not intended to be used as steps, and obviously we shouldn't extend our center of gravity above the top of that step ladder in fear that it could tip over, and obviously not sitting on top of the actual ladder itself. These are both things that, again, if you refer to those labels and manufacturers' instructions, they will tell you not to do these things. So like I've mentioned a few times now, we need to make sure that we maintain our labels. Obviously, the picture on the left is what I like seeing when I go out to my customers' job sites, making sure that they're clear and legible, making sure the sun hasn't faded them away. That picture to the right was a job that I had visited where, again, you can't read what's on the labels. You can see the outline of where they once existed, but it doesn't give us really any information to help us use this ladder safely. And this is more important now than probably was 5-6 years ago, and we'll get into why that is in a few slides here. So an A-frame ladder or a step ladder or self-supporting ladder, whatever type of term you want to use to call these, the old rule of thumb is making sure that we don't collapse them and use them in a leaning position like you can see in this picture. Again, that's not using that particular ladder for its design purpose. They're not intended to be used this way, and you run the risk of that ladder from slipping out at the feet and sliding down and causing the employee to fall. So making sure that we're not using our step ladders in this way is critical. And again, it was one of most cited violations that OSHA has from 2018 and into 2019. Keep this picture in the back of your mind though, because we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a few slides. As I mentioned before, making sure that our ladders are on a level and stable surface is critical. And so on the picture on the left, we have a step ladder or maybe an extension ladder being used in a stairwell. It's hard to tell, but a paint can is being used to, again, keep it in a level position. And that's obviously not ideal. It looks like that paintbrush is actually helping out a little bit as well. Not an ideal situation, and what the solution would be is looking at your ladder manufacturers. They offer all types of different accessories, and some of these I'll point out as we go through the webinar. But in this particular case, that picture on the right shows a side rail or a foot extension attachment. So when you need to place a ladder on those surfaces that are sloped, like the one in that picture to the right, you can see this attachment attaches right to the side rail itself, and it allows it to vary the length of that side rail or foot to make sure that we keep it as level as possible. I would like to ask too that if you do decide to get some of these accessories, that again you verify that those accessories are compatible with the manufacturer's ladder that you're using them on, and check with them first to see if they offer those before going out to Amazon or wherever to obtain. So when ascending and descending ladders, it's important that we use three-point of contact. Three-point of contact is 2 hands, 1 foot, or 2 feet in 1 hand at all times. In this picture to the right, you can see that this employee is not utilizing three-point contact as he has a cinder block in his right hand. He is doing one thing right, which is facing the ladder. We always want to face the ladder when we're ascending and descending it. And instead of using his hand to carry the cinder block up the ladder or down the ladder, we want to look, is there equipment that can be used? Oftentimes, especially in a construction setting, there is going to be some sort of lift, whether it be a telehandler, a crane, something that can reach that roof or upper landing surface and take that type of material or equipment to that area safely, opposed to somebody climbing a ladder. If all else fails, you can always use a rope pull system, which essentially is a rope with the carabiner on it that you stand at the edge of the roof and pull that object or material up. Obviously, from our standpoint, we'd much prefer our insureds use equipment opposed to that, but definitely maintaining three-point contact is critical to preventing a fall from a ladder. Job-made ladders are, again, something you may see on a construction site in particular. Just like our ladder requirements, the steps or rungs need to be spaced equally. We need to make sure that there's no missing steps or rungs. That picture in the bottom right-hand corner shows that. And then no sharp edges or nails sticking out. The picture on the top right corner will show you that if you look at the red arrow, there is a nail sticking out. And as we climb up and down, the last thing we want is that protruding nail to get caught on somebody's pants or shirt or vest and throw them off balance. The picture to the left kind of shows an interesting design or construction of a job-made ladder that certainly doesn't look right from my standpoint, but how do we know what to look for when building these job-made ladders and how they should be done? OSHA does have a fact sheet out on this. A simple search of OSHA job-made ladders would take you to the same diagram or fact sheet, which supplies the same diagram, but it shows you the different types of dimensions that we need to have, our spacing of our rungs and the different types of spacers or fillers that we need to in between each of our rungs. I would recommend that if you are utilizing any job-made ladders, that they are built to these specifications. You also want to make sure that you sand down the rungs and side rails. Getting a sliver while using them can also result in an injury, believe it or not. And also making sure that we don't paint the ladders. Just like all of our other ladders that we use, we want to make sure that they aren't painted or coated so that we can perform our inspections and be able to identify any damage, whether it be cracking or holes or whatever it may be, and that paint could cover those types of things up. So there are ways to use these job-made ladders safely and construct them safely. Just visit OSHA for more information or talk to your Argent Loss Control representative. From general ladder requirements, we always want to make sure that we're keeping the area around the top and the bottom of the ladder clear. Obviously, on the bottom of the ladder, there's a slip, trip, fall potential. If we have debris or tools as we're getting down from the ladder, that's the last thing we want to do is trip and fall in them. When we're storing tools and materials like that top right-hand picture up on an elevated rung, there's a potential for not only a slip, trip, fall, but also from a struck-by potential if that hammer were to come down and land on somebody's foot. Ways to prevent that while still having your tools readily available are using the tool bags that, again, come directly from the manufacturer. That would be the picture to the left. Shows a tool bag where there's some different hand tools and things that are available. That, again, is designed specifically for that ladder. That picture to the right is just another option that I've seen out in the construction field, where an old PVC section of pipe that was duct taped to the side rail. Again, while it might not be ideal, given that the duct tape could be covering up some defects that the ladder may have, like cracks on the side rails, it's still something that is going to hold and contain tools and keep them readily available. Just like anything, we want to make sure that, again, all this added weight that we're placing on the ladder, that it meets that duty rating that, again, would be found on the labels for that ladder. Other general requirements, again, making sure that we do use it for its design purpose. In the event that you need to get a little bit further up in the air or a little bit higher elevation, we cannot tie ladders together to make them longer like you see in the picture to the right. And again, as I'd mentioned a few times now, we can't load them beyond their maximum load capacity. One of the last bullet points there, cut ladders down to shorter size. This is something that I do run into quite often out in the field, where an extension ladder, one section of it may be damaged, but we figure, hey, let's keep the other section, it's still in good condition, but let's cut it down to size so we can use it at smaller heights. While that seems like a good idea, the second we do cut that ladder down from its originally designed height, again, it's not being used for its design purpose and likely would cause damage to it. So definitely want to throw caution out there. If that is a practice that you have within your organization, you might want to reconsider, as it could, again, result in a fall injury. When we're talking about extension or non-self-supporting ladders, it's essential that we have the proper angle when we're using them to access an upper landing surface. The picture to the left has a label that I haven't seen very often, but it is basically a 90-degree angle used for an employee that is setting up the ladder to confirm that the lines are perpendicular to the surfaces that they're with, which to the top or to the bottom down is would be the wall, and the bottom line would be to the ground. You can see the picture to the right. Just by looking at this one, we can tell there's a little bit too much distance from the ladder feet to that actual wall or landing surface that the top of that ladder is resting on. So what is that proper angle that we need to have? Well, I had mentioned it before. It's that 4-to-1 ratio. And again, this is one of those most frequently cited violations that OSHA has. 4-to-1, what we're talking about here essentially is if you have a 16-foot wall up to a roof that we need to gain access to, we need to have the ladder or the feet of that ladder placed 4 feet away from that wall. So 4 being the height and 1 being the horizontal distance. The ladder feet need to be from that surface. If you're not good at math like me and you don't want to take the time to do all this, you can use a somewhat of a cheat sheet, or the NIOSH smartphone app, or the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health has a very good app for determining what type of angle we are at with our ladders. Not only that, they have an inspection process. If you look to that left screenshot, that is kind of a checklist for looking at different areas on a ladder during your inspection process to make sure that we're looking at all parts and accessories. But also in the middle, they have a gauge, and the gauge can be set on the side rail of the extension ladder, and it will tell you, is the ladder too shallow, or is it too steep, or is it at its proper angle? So I would encourage you to download this, especially if you're using extension ladders on a regular basis, like a lot of the roofing and construction companies we work with. This is a free app, free to use, and it's something that I use on nearly all job sites that I visit. One other thing that we want to make sure with our extension ladders is that they are secured at top. Now, there's no real specific way that we need to secure our ladders at the top. So you're going to see all sorts of different methods of doing that, whether it be a bungee cord or tie wire. In these pictures, you can see there's an actual bracket that's placed on the roof and that connects the top of that ladder. The middle picture, I believe, is a chain that's just used, or that right picture at the top is a clip that's fastened to the deck of a roof. One of the products that I've seen, and again, I'm not endorsing any products by any means, but this one caught my eye because that picture on the bottom is a slip-resistant mat that also secures the ladder. And the reason I like this is because the metal flashing on the top of that, the cap of that parapet wall, is oftentimes slippery, especially during the early winter and late spring, or early spring, late winter months, where we have the thaw and refreeze. So this is a slip resistant mat that, as we're making that transition from ladder to parapet wall, it provides for a better traction when doing so. So the link is there if you want more information on that, but just an interesting solution. But nonetheless, we need to secure those ladders to make sure that they're not being displaced as we're climbing them. Another requirement when it comes to extension ladders, and may have been mentioned before, is making sure that we have the ladder extended in a position that has 3 feet above the upper landing surface that we're stepping onto. So that picture to the right shows you a ladder that's set up properly. It's a roof that the employer or the contractor was gaining access to. If you count the rungs, you can see that there's 4 rungs that are actually visible above the actual roof. So that right there tells me that we have the 3 feet we need. But you could take it a step further, where this contractor actually painted the 3 rungs red to make sure that they have the 3 feet they needed. Now, again, I'm not telling you to go out and start painting your ladders red with the top 3 feet, because you might be hiding defects, but something interesting that I've seen over the years. The picture to the left there is another attachment or an accessory for your ladder, and this is just extensions for the side rails. So instead of making that transition onto and off of the ladder, off to the side, you're actually just stepping through the ladder. So there's no shift in that center of gravity. There's not going to be little to no side movement when you're getting onto and off of the ladder. So if you haven't seen these, or if you maybe you've thought about buying these in the past, I would really encourage you to do so. If you've used these yourself, you would probably agree with me that this is a safer option than extending the 3 feet past the roof. So there are ladders, step ladders that are made not only for side or to be used on either side of that step ladder, but in this case, you could actually put 2 employees on either side of this, or on one side, one on the other side, depending on the rating of the ladder, which again, you would need to look at the ladder labels to make sure it's being used properly. But this, opposed to a typical traditional type of step ladder, you can see the back side has the same spacing as the rungs do on both sides. So that tells me that those aren't cross braces and that they are rated for use. But again, look at the ladder labels to make sure that you can use these in both positions or with 2 employees, one on either side. Some additional protection in the event that you do need to use a step ladder close to the close to a wall that might have an opening, or like the picture I showed you before where there was a floor opening that we were working near. The installation of maybe some taller guard railings could be an option. Again, if fall protection or fall arrest might be the safest option, but if all else fails, if we are exposed to maybe a 30-foot fall out a window, like was the case in this picture that was taken, you can also install higher guard railings to prevent that from being an even worse fall than it would be if you just were to land from the ladder. So just to kind of touch on some of the things that I've been mentioning. So there are step ladders out there these days that do allow for something that was always taboo in the past, which is to use it in a collapsed and leaning position. These are 2 different examples from manufacturers. Again, I'm not endorsing either of these, but certainly ones that I've seen over the past few months that contractors have been using. So just like any step ladder, you can open it up, use it that way, or you can close it and then lean it and use it against the wall, or even use it possibly for accessing an upper landing surface. Again, check the labels to make sure that you can do that. But this is why it is critical to maintain your labels, because as we introduce these new types of ladders to our operations, to have the different flexibility to be used in these different positions, it's important that we have those labels legible so that employees know that it is in fact that type of ladder. The other day I ran into a situation where it was an apprentice and they were using they're using a step ladder in a collapsed and leaning position, and then upon further review of the labels, it was not one of these types of ladders that's rated for that use. So again, I would encourage you to make sure that you have those labels on these and maintain them as best as possible. And typically with these ladders, there's clips that are used in a collapsed position to make sure that they don't extend while using them. Making sure those clips are in good condition, making sure they weren't removed, are all very important. But again, the manufacturer will provide further instruction how to use these safely and inspect them safely. But these types of ladders, I would definitely encourage your organization looking into, just based on the flexibility of how they can be used. So we'll touch on fixed ladders as well, and the main thing I wanted to touch on was the different requirements now under the walking working surface standard. Is the fixed ladders. Cages were the big thing for ladders. I think over 20 feet tall we needed cages for. Now there's been some changes to that. Fixed ladders taller than 24 feet, the cages are no longer considered fall protection, and any newly installed fixed ladder, whether it be a brand new building that you're constructing, or maybe it's the replacement of an existing fixed ladder with a new one, if it's over 24 feet tall, it does need to have a ladder safety or fall arrest system in place, because the cages are no longer considered fall protection in OSHA's eyes. If you wait all the way to November 19th of 2036, and you haven't switched out your fixed ladder, at that point you will need to install a ladder safety or fall arrest system to those existing fixed ladders that may not have them. The picture that I have included there is just an interesting one. I actually had to climb this one, and there's no 3 feet extended past that upper landing surface, and it made it very difficult to get onto and off of. So again, keep an eye on those fixed ladders. The other thing I want to remind you is to inspect them. Just like all of our other step ladders, extension ladders, our fixed ladders should be inspected as well. This was a nasty injury that occurred several years ago where the actual fasteners or bolts to this masonry wall had rusted and corroded over time, and as the worker was climbing down from the ladder pulled away from the wall and resulted in a serious injury from a fall. So again, just like all of our other ladders, we need to inspect our fixed ladders as well. So the last few slides here, I just wanted to share some of the pictures that I've taken over the years and some of the unsafe ladder practices that we've seen. In this case, this was actually a picture I had taken on vacation one year. I was out in Northern California at some shop, and noticed that this employee or maybe a worker for the property management company of this small shop I was in had an employee up on a step ladder. When looking at this employee, I think we can all point out what those arrows are pointing at. The one to the right at the top is obviously he's stepping on the top step of the step ladder. The one to the left at the top is obviously him stepping on the cross brace. The one to the bottom left-hand side is based on the, if you look very closely, there is a patron or a customer that's actually sitting in a chair, and the employee performing this task is holding a caulk gun. If you were to drop that gun onto that customer's head, that would definitely not be good. But the arrow to the bottom right-hand side is pointing to the outside, and why that is what we talked about before, making sure we're not setting up ladders in areas where people are walking by or coming into and equipment could come into. This is Northern California. It's a very bright, sunny day outside, and as somebody comes in through that door, their eyes might not be adjusted to the darker store, and so they might not see this step ladder. And given that this employee's center of gravity is too high for the way he's using it, it wouldn't take much force to throw him off balance and to allow him to fall to the floor. So again, these are the type of unsafe practices with ladders that we need to address right away to make sure it doesn't result in a serious fall injury, or in this case, a potential injury to the customers that are at this shop. So we talked about choosing the right ladder. In this case, this was an aluminum ladder, and if you look very closely to the outlet that's on that wall, you can see that it's missing a cover plate to it. So there could be exposed conductors with the cover missing, and metal ladder in such close proximity could result in a serious electrical shock injury. The other reason I wanted to mention this is the electrical shock, if we did have somebody that was shocked by using this ladder and being so close to a conductor, the actual shock might not hurt them. It could likely be the fall from that ladder that could seriously injure them, or in some cases result in a fatality. So again, just another reason why choosing the right ladder can help you prevent a serious injury. Here we have some cement form work going on, and as we can see from the picture and as we learned from the slides before, this is 2 violations in one, a twofer. We have a step ladder that's collapsed and leaning up against the form, and then we have the employee not only using it improperly that way, but also staying on the very top of it. So 2 potential OSHA violations and 1 significant exposure to serious injury with this picture. Designed for or used for their design purpose, right? We talked about that. So now we have 2 step ladders at this job where there was a taller wall being worked on, and in order to reach the top of that wall, they figured, hey, let's take 2 step ladders and put a plank in between them and use that as a makeshift scaffold. Well, looking a little bit more closely at the labels, it tells you that you can't use it for this type of purpose. And so again, using a mobile scaffold type system, like the picture to the right, that likely would have been a safer option, as that is rated for that type of use and should not fail when used properly. one of the last slides we'll show you here today is this is a picture of Lambeau Field. I think it was the most recent renovation that Lambeau just went under. And if you look closely at this picture, you do see the flags below the worker's foot, which indicates that there is a wire rope guard railing system in place to protect against the falls. But as you can see, that employee is working from a ladder. And so the first thing I ask is the ladder positioned properly? Well, as we talked about before, no, he's not facing the ladder. He's facing out, the opposite direction. And with it being used improperly, there's a good chance that this employee could fall. And so because they're higher than the actual top rail that's provided, I don't see any harness, I don't see any fall protection being utilized. And so you start thinking it's the Lambeau renovation job. This is a huge project with hundreds and maybe even thousands of people that come to it each and every day. How many people saw this? It could be a lot. Well, in fact, I took this picture off of the news. It was off of a video of the news, and so now we're talking thousands of people that have probably saw this. And the other people that watch the news are of course OSHA compliance officers. So again, we need to make sure that we're using our ladders appropriately, and in this case, maybe even using fall arrest equipment. Lastly, we'll just end on some interesting photos. Again, I didn't take these photos over the years, but just one that I found. Picture to the left, an aluminum ladder being used in a pool with a power tool, electrical power tool. At least the employee is wearing their safety glasses. We do have a skid steer with a ladder being elevated to the pole, where again, this would be a lack of pre-planning. We need to get to this height, and we know we need it higher we're going to only be able to reach 4 feet higher than that ladder. So it's a simple equation to figure out how tall of ladder that we need, or how tall the equipment needs to be to reach it. A telehandler rough terrain fork truck wasn't tall enough or didn't have a long enough boom to reach the steeple of this church, and a lineman that has too short of a ladder as well. The last one here to the left that I really like is it looks like they actually do have the proper angle for this extension ladder, because the employee at the bottom to the right is holding it and has his arms, it looks to be at a 90-degree angle with his feet up against the feet of the ladder. So that typically is a good gauge for making sure we have that 4-to-1 ratio that we need. But what I really like about this is the employee on the back side of that ladder bracing it for that employee that's actually on the ladder. So with all those horrible pictures that we just saw, I want to give us a palate cleanser here and see if we could end or finish on a positive note. This was 2 pictures that one of my colleagues had taken at one of his customers' roofing job sites a few weeks ago, where we have an extension ladder set up. I don't see any cause for concern for any cars, equipment, or people running into the base of that ladder. From what I see, the angle looks to be on the 4-to-1 ratio that we need. They have the side rail extensions for that 3 feet past the upper landing surface, so we can access it through the ladder opposed to going off to one of its sides. And then if you look to the picture to the right, this is what you would find when accessing the roof. And you have a pathway that looks to be a flat roof, so we can use warning lines, but we have a pathway created by not only warning lines, but they're actual guard railings, pathway being from the ladder to the warning line area. To take it a step further, there's actually a door or a yellow guardrail or gate that, again, acts as a fall protection barrier for getting close to this area, making sure that somebody doesn't back in to where this ladder is located. So all in all, this is what I like to see when we go out to a roofing job site, and certainly something to use if you are using extension ladders within your organization to make it as safe as possible. For further resources on ladder safety, I would encourage you to go to any of these websites. The American Ladder Institute, obviously OSHA has all sorts of information on different ladders, whether it be job made, extension, or just their general e-tool on falls from ladders. There is materials also on our Argent Loss Control website at www.wbconnect.com. There you will find the L4 documents that we talked about, along with the pre-job planning form that was reviewed. And lastly, if you do have any other further questions or are needed resources, you can always certainly go to your dedicated Argent Loss Control representative. Are there any questions that anyone has? I see some. Are there any questions that we have? And if you do have any questions, please type them into the chat box. Okay, I'm seeing no questions, so we're going to wrap up for the day. Wanted to thank everybody for attending the webinar. As always, this webinar will be recorded and placed onto the Insured Access System at www.wbconnect.com. It will take a few weeks for that to be on there, but it will be on there. January's webinar will be coming up in a few weeks here, and it will be on OSHA record keeping. So I would certainly encourage you all to attend that as well. So, and lastly, thank you for your time. I greatly appreciate it. Have a safe day.